Hi, it's Jo and Steve from Fresh Agenda. And Steve, this week we're going through a bit of a breakdown of our approach to modelling the future in these times. So we're coming to you from our dungeon. Someone called it a dungeon this morning. It's a bit rude.
We have a bit of a dull day here in Brisbane, in Melbourne today. This will be a bit of a journey, so stick with us. It's a complex story and a complex issue. Okay, so let's kick it off. We've attempted to wrap into our Global Dairy Directions analysis a comprehensive view of what we understand about the impacts of COVID-19 on the global dairy market.
Yep.
So I guess it's really early days, and literally days, about 21 days or so since this broke out and we had serious lockdowns being applied in Europe and the US. I guess we're trying to deal with extreme complexity.
Yeah.
And as we've drawn there, we've got, this started with an outbreak in China. We certainly saw big impacts on global trade in that first month in February as that lockdown. Now that spread to other continents, and we've seen during March, and it's only during March, we've seen these total lockdowns of communities.
That's right.
And populations.
Yeah, which are really, really badly affecting food channels, which we'll go into.
We'll come into. Where this goes from here, I mean, at some point we'll get through so that health systems can manage the illness levels, and we go into what we have called staggered reactivation.
Yeah.
So when this releases and we see some sort of return to normality, by then, of course, the world is in recession, quite a deep one. And for a period of time, and while we're, when we start to come out of that, there'll be a new normal, as we've described it. So as a first stab, our understanding of the various impacts we'll build. I mean, we've tried to make this comprehensive. We've built a base scenario, which has the major variables of what's known of those at this stage.
Where we think they are and what they are at this point.
And the sequencing of those things as we go forward. But what it does, it creates a basis to measure the impact and the risk going forward, and to get some sense of what it does to values as we move.
Yep.
So I always love a supply chain chart.
I know you do.
And here's one that's been revived for this. This is pretty simple, but starting with fairly important shares of market at the end of that.
That's right.
There, in terms of the channel shares between retail and food service in cheese and butter.
Yeah.
And there's another product group, cream, which is involved in this as well, which we're trying to include in this, but it's certainly in the analysis.
And it's probably safe to say that getting data on this is not easy. So these are rough estimates.
Yeah.
But just to illustrate that there are different impacts from those channel closures for different commodities.
Certainly. So as we go around the issues that we've mapped, let's start with, we've had major channels completely closed. And so that's impacted cheese, butter and cream directly and suddenly. That pushes a shift to people eating more all meals at home, most meals at home. And we've seen an early wave of panic shopping, which dairy has benefited from across the categories. That's now into a lull.
Yeah, at retail. Yep.
At retail, at least, and we're starting to see a slowing of those volumes. We've seen also a very sudden product mix response as manufacturers attempt to deal with the fact that they see those end markets shifting. They want to avoid that exposure, and they're starting to move milk
away from cheese.
Away from cheese, and away from and trying to deal with cream. So that tends to mean that milk is going to move towards skim milk powder and butter in large volumes, and that's
where possible. And that's the other issue, I suppose, to point out that we're heading into the Northern Hemisphere peak of production, and so the capability of people to actually shift that milk to different outlets is limited, particularly in the US.
And the US is already reaching capacity limits, and we're 6 weeks away from the peak, so it's
scary stuff.
It's a bit of a nightmare. So while that plays out, we do have some disruptions, obviously, with not only that we've got milk that needs to move and can't move to certain places because plants are closing, or reaching those limits. But we've also had tremendous disruption to transport and logistics. The shipping trade is still affected by China.
Yep.
And now we see lockdowns in major parts of Europe where shipping leaving those markets is being constrained. So it's not only the internal movement, but trying to get exports onto ships. There will be a farm response to the inevitable decline in values, which we've already seen spectacularly. They will take a while to get back to farm.
Yeah.
And so the milk growing in Europe and the US suddenly has a big chunk of the market missing. So it will take a little while for those prices to reach farmers as a result. Taking all that to account, we've obviously got a recession that's going to hit the world.
Yeah.
And
obviously particularly those developing markets.
Yeah. So they don't always crash during recession. It's the silver lining here that while we've seen slowing of trade, say in skim milk powder in most markets, it's slowed. With falling prices, that will be a bit of a trigger for improved demand.
That's what we've seen for GFC, that behaviour, low prices, and they'll get back into the market.
Yeah. So in these developed markets, we see significant trading down. That occurs both in retail and in food service.
Sure.
So in retail, it's trading away from brands to private label, so cheaper products. And in food service, rather than eating a meal out, it's a takeaway or a delivery. Yeah,
with pizza and burgers, very strong in that.
So in the past, that has seen a rebound in dairy consumption, for cheese at least.
For volumes, yeah.
And then we get to this new normal. What does that look like?
Yeah.
No one knows. So our platform pulls all this together. The thing overlaying all of this, which we can't predict and which we can't model, is this government intervention which stretches the entire spectrum.
That's right. So that will be impacting from farm right through to consumers. Government efforts to reduce the impacts of recession on consumers, but also we may see intervention in terms of limiting the flow of milk in some regions like the EU, or storage or government purchasing. So a whole range of issues that government's going to try and address.
And that'll also impact the way in which we come out of these lockdowns.
For sure.
And just how that may release more, I guess, more demand in those affected channels. That's all important to get that back into action.
Yeah. But it's a significant source of uncertainty as well.
Huge.
So.
Yep. Putting all those together, without repeating that, but essentially what we've done, and this is the structure of our modelling, brings all those into one place. There are different timelines, different impacts on supply and demand, and that's essentially a map of what we're modelling.
And the other dimension there, of course, we've got down the left-hand side, is different regions feeling that at different stages, and in different intensities. So it is a complex picture.
It is. So our dashboard looks a little like that. So what we've managed to do in terms of the structure of our DTS is obviously change this and overlay the model with this framework, so that any of those big variables that we've just seen on the previous page shift, we can instantly model the impact on the next 2 years of what that does over time.
Yeah. And that will be important, obviously, for subscribers that have the DTS. They can basically sort of quantify these changes in real time, because there are almost daily changes to some of these things.
As we know more. Yeah, that's right. So this continues to develop. This will update with facts as we get them, and the overlay of this will continue to be a feature, probably for the rest of the year. So, Jo, that's a big story. Just to finish on the chart of the week, what happened here?
Just really briefly, it's a bit of a mea culpa. Bit of a mix-up with trade data out of China, which, of course, everybody was waiting on quite carefully. And there was a bit of confusion about whether it was 2 months of data that were being released together or batched together, or
and how it was broken up.
Yeah. So those of us who get our newsletter, we did send out a correction. But this is just showing that it's a much more mixed picture than we originally thought. It was looking pretty sad when we thought 2 months was 1 month of data. No, 1 month of data was 2 months of trade.
You can see confusion is still there.
Yeah, it's still confusing. So a little bit more of a mixed picture, obviously, in that trade, but obviously in those key products of whole milk powder and skim milk powder, still a bit down on the same period last year, which we were kind of expecting, but not quite as dire as we'd originally thought.
Okay.
So apologies for that.
All right, well, that's a wrap from us. That's a quick tour through a very complex month's work. It'll continue to roll, and we'll keep updating our viewers with what we're seeing. But thanks for watching. We'll be back next week, and we'll see you then.